Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today we have a sort of special live review for all of you, and that's because we are deep in the heart of allocation season. I think it's only going to get worse from here, which means tons of limited edition offerings from different distilleries hitting shelves, or really not hitting shelves, just, you know, backroom handshakes and deals, people getting these bottles. And so we're all trying to chase, you know, the new B-Tacs that are going to be dropping and the new limited things like this old Granddad 16, which means lots and lots of videos to be made for people reviewing whiskey on YouTube. I am no exception, which means that I am struggling to get reviews out at the pace to match the amount of bottles that are coming in for the channel to be reviewed. So with that said, some of these live reviews may end up happening over the next couple of months just to try to stay afloat. All the while in the background, I'll be shooting and editing content to be dropping along the way as well. So today, as you saw the thumbnail, we're going to be taking a look at Bardstown Bourbon Company's Discovery number 12. And I'm sure many of you at this point have, you know, watched other reviews of this bottle. You've probably seen the breakdown on the label. We can go over that very quickly in this video as well. But in the case of this video, the way this is going to work for those of you watching live or watching the replay is that this is not going to be 10 or 15 minutes. This is going to be more like a 30 to 40 situation, because I'm going to be doing some comparisons at the end of the initial review to some other bottles that I think, you know, might be comparable on people's end of the year type lists. So when I think about where we are in the market, you know, in the whiskey enthusiast world right now, I think we've got Russell's 15, a lot of us at the top. We've got Old Fitz 13 VVS towards the top. And those are definitively going to be top 3 or top 5 type whiskeys, I think, for most folks. And who knows what the Pappies and what the B-Tacs and some of those other really, really limited bottlings are going to be like. But there's also kind of the middleweight class, which is what Joe C. said in Patreon earlier today. We have those middleweight bottles. What's going to occupy the top 10? What's going to occupy the top 20? And then below that, I get a little bit more disinterested, I would say. But today, the question for me is this Bardstown Discovery 12 going to be a top 10 kind of whiskey in 2024? And so I've pulled out some of these other bottlings, one of which, a little bit of a sleeper bottle, and I don't know that this is necessarily top 10. We're going to find out how it compares, though, at the very least. The Boulder Cask Strength 2024. This just came in earlier today. I don't know if I'm going to throw it in in this video. Who knows? Maybe my arm will be twisted by the live chat. But I've had one sip of this before this video, which is the old Granddad 16 at 100 proof. I've got the Maker's Cellar Age, which is cask strength. Mostly 13-year whiskey in this blend. Very similar proof point, which I think is an interesting comparison. We've got the River Roots 18-year MGP, 36% rye mash. Also very similar proof. Also a whiskey that I think is probably going to be in my top 10, top 5. And then I've got some samples hiding behind these bottles. Jack 12 Batch 2, which was 2024. Old Forester Birthday Bourbon 2024. And I pulled one that was not a 2024, but I think is a good comparison. A Russell's 13. I believe this to be batch number 4. The laser code is LL/LC. So let me know in the live chat if this is in fact batch 4. If not 4, then it's batch 5. Either way, one of those two batches would be one of the more recent releases. And I think that might be an apt comparison, not only from a proof perspective, but also from a profile perspective to this Discovery 12. So that's a long intro. I apologize for those watching the replay on this, but I just want to kind of set the scene. So we're going to go review, then we're going to kind of shoot from the hip on some of these comparisons side by side, see where we end up. Again, answering the question, is this a top 10 bourbon of 2024? Hopefully by the end of this video, we'll find out. And let me give you some tasting notes and everything like that. I will interact with the chat as we move through this, you know, sort of focused live stream. So I'm not going to just monologue at you guys. But let's get into this now. Steve Parker says, you need an assistant. I have someone in mind. Oh, yeah. Sometimes I do feel like I need a little bit of an assistant, Steve. As the channel grows, it's been pretty remarkable. Guys, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're almost at 10K. We're going to be there in about a week or 10 days or something like that. And check out the Patreon as well. Let's go on to the nose now. Discovery Batch 12 at 115.2 proof or 57.6% ABV. Most of this blend, 48%. We'll say it's most because it's the highest percentage component, is a Kentucky 14-year, rumored to be Wild Turkey, unconfirmed but rumored. 29% is 10-year, appears to be Heaven Hill. 15% of a 10-year, which appears to be that Beam Mystery Mash, 78.5% corn, if I had to guess. And then 8% of a Bardstown Bourbon Company 4-grain. So there we go. Let's see. On to the nose now. Here we go. All right, so nose of Discovery 12 to me, after getting more air into this bottle, it's actually gotten more and more fruit forward. So I would say this to me is a lot of dark cherry and raspberry notes. I don't think it's really that super dark, plummy blackberry kind of profile. I think it stays more in these kind of red fruits. Like when I smell this whiskey, the first thing that pops into my mind is burgundy, like just the color, just a dark, kind of like a dark red color because of the way that it smells on the nose. So I'm going to go, first impression is fruit forward, dark red fruit notes. I also get a little bit of a sour sensation on the nose too. There's a little bit of a, I'm almost going to say a watermelon note, and it's kind of a similar note that I actually picked up on Discovery 11. So Discovery 11 was a brighter profile, it was a little bit nuttier, a little bit more direct, I would say, less dark, less funky. But it had this kind of bright toned note with the cherry note on Discovery 11. So Discovery 11 to me was a little bit of a brighter cherry, and it had a little more lift on the nose. And along those same lines, then it also had kind of a watermelon tartness on the nose, I would say. It's not necessarily a note, but it's more of a sensation of the tartness. I actually pick a little bit of that up here on Discovery 12. It's much more subdued than Discovery 11, but I think it's worth pointing out. All right, so underneath all of that, I get kind of a little bit of like a, burnt top of a creme brulee. Like there's kind of a vanilla sensation, kind of a sugary sensation, but it's a little torched, it's a little bit darker. And also below that, I would say that I get a nice combination of a caramel sauce and kind of a chocolate sauce. So I think about just taking, when you're a kid and you're getting ice cream out of the freezer. For me, it was always vanilla ice cream till I die. # vanilla fam. Whenever you get vanilla ice cream out of the freezer as a kid, and you have your squirt bottle of Hershey's chocolate syrup and caramel, and you're just kind of doing the double drizzle. All right, I'm not going to make that hand motion again, but that's kind of a Discovery 12 note here. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think this whiskey is dark, funky, dark fruit forward. There is a little bit of a lift to it on the nose, which again, I call that kind of more tart, slightly watermelon sensation. And there's also something else that's a little bit brighter sitting there too. Maybe it's a citrus kind of note, maybe it's a little white pepper. But by and large, I think it's a darker whiskey, probably than Discovery 11. The profile, it smells great on the nose. I will say this. On the nose, this would probably be a top 10 whiskey of the year for me. But it's not a top 10 because there's a wow factor where you have one distinct note that just blows you away. I think it's a wow factor on this whiskey more because of the balance on the nose. So I think it shows off its subtleties as opposed to being kind of like a one-trick pony. So with that said, let's go to the palate now. Cheers. Wow. So I've already had a little bit of whiskey today. My palate is set. But between drinking that whiskey and doing this live video right now, I had a quick bite to eat, and super mild, just like a couple of egg wraps, actually, which it sounds silly to be doing that at like 7 p.m., but sometimes you take what you can get. And so real mild flavors, but even so, that first sip really stung me on the palate. Like it had a nice pop to it, I would say, at 115 proof. So to me, the first impression, great spice up front, I would say. A little bit, just a teeny bit unbalanced on the first sip for me. I love the notes that I got. For some reason, it popped me a little bit hard up front. So let me do a second sip and see if that was just kind of a fluke thing. As I go back to the nose very quickly, though, I am picking up a little bit of a funky oak profile. That wasn't immediately apparent on the nose initially. I think as I've sipped it, as I've acclimated to it, I'm now able to dig beneath some of those very concentrated fruit notes deeper into the profile, and at the base of the whiskey, I'm getting this nice oak funk, leatheriness. All right. Wow. So first sip, I think, again, was just an acclimation period for me. So I'm not going to judge it on that. Very, very rich fruits. like a chocolate fruit sensation, chocolate raspberry, chocolate cherry notes on the palate. A nice balance of spice. We're transitioning now into the finish, and it is getting leathery. It's getting a little bit of funkiness, almost like a turkey funk. So if the rumors are true and there's a little turkey in here, I could see that, because it has that kind of funky, leathery rickhouse oak that you get on turkey products. But yeah, I think this whiskey is by and large very balanced. First sip, I'm gonna again chalk that up to being just my palate needing reset after having a quick little bite to eat. But even though it is balanced, I think there is still room to, I don't know, it's still room to be even more balanced, I would say. Like, there's definitely not a wow factor for me. It shows off by, by being balanced, but even at the same time, it leaves me wanting something. I don't know if it's proof that I want from this. I don't know if it's maybe a little bit more richness at some point in the sip. It's really outstanding whiskey. And I think for me, it's probably not a top 5, or it's probably a top 10, just based on where I'm at right now before we do these comparisons. It does leave me wanting a little bit of something, but at the end of the day, at 140 to 160, which is what you're going to find it at, I don't think you're really going to do much better than this whiskey. I think this is fantastic stuff. You know, you could be picky and talk about, I mean, I guess Russell's 13 didn't come out this year. We'll see how it compares to Jack 12, but anyways, I'm kind of going into the weeds now a little bit. Let me do one more sip before we start these comparisons. All right. You know what? You definitely do acclimate to the whiskey quite a bit, in the sense that each subsequent sip feels more and more relaxed, I would say. It doesn't keep a lot of intensity. It continues to relax as I sip it. That might sound natural. I think that is natural for a lot of whiskeys. This one in particular is giving me that sensation, whereas sometimes you get a barn burner of a whiskey that never slows down on every sip. So I think this is really, really solid stuff. It's a buy it, back it up kind of whiskey for me, just to kind of wrap this review portion up before we go to the comparisons. It is a buy it, back it up. Is it a buy a case kind of whiskey? I don't think so. I mean, I think if I have one of these and one kind of in storage waiting to be pulled out, I think that's enough, you know? It's a great sipper. It's not got that one factor that makes me not able to put the bottle down. So I'd be curious to find out what you guys think in the live chat and also in the comment section for those watching the replay. I think it's really, really good. Don't get me wrong. I'm being hyper critical right now because I'm talking top 10 of the year, which brings me to that question. I do think this is a top 10 whiskey. I think in a blind, it's going to be interesting. So tomorrow night, which is going to be a Tuesday night, October 1st, this is right now, if you're watching the replay, I shot this on September 30th. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be doing a blind, early evening, similar to this, where I put this up against Discovery 11 and then Discoveries 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm interested to see how it performs in that blind, especially against those early batches of Discovery. I feel like it's going to beat 11. Just to memory, I would say that this is a more favorable whiskey than Discovery 11. Yeah, so we'll find out. And I might be head over heels about this whiskey in a blind. I'm in a very critical, focused kind of review mode right now as I go through this. But let's do a couple of comparisons. I think this is a top 10 whiskey of the year. To me, it feels like it's going to fall in that 10 to 8 range probably of what I've tasted so far this year, excluding single barrel picks, excluding whiskeys that are less than a couple hundred bottles in a batch or something like that. So when I think about this, for instance, River Roots 18, which is only about 170 bottles, this isn't really in the running, but I think as a point of comparison in this video, where I just want to judge something purely, up against what I've tasted this year that's really, really good, I think this is a good bottle to throw in the mix. Top Dog says top 10, but not top 5. Yeah, and listen, a top 10 bourbon of the year doesn't need to be a perfect bourbon to me. A top 3, we need to be getting close to what perfection is, and I use air quotes on purpose. Russell's 15 is still not perfect, but man, whatever it is blows all of its imperfections out of the water because the profile's so insane. And, you know, Old Fitz VVS 13 to me is a little closer to perfection than Russell's 15, but more reserved. So it's a tough comparison. Then you go to Discovery 12, and I think this has so much to love and a little bit to criticize. I love the profile. I love a dark whiskey. I love dark fruit notes that has this kind of mixture of everything going on. I am curious, you know, like which parts of this blend are contributing which notes, because it's always kind of hard to tell. But I think the possibility of there being a lot of wild turkey in here is pretty evident, I would say. All right, so let's do a few comparisons now. Let's start with the Maker's Cellar Aged. This is a bottle that, for me, is not a great one this year. Man, the Discovery 12 is getting better each sip, actually. Even though it is flattening out just a bit, naturally, the flavors are getting deeper and richer. So, man. The Cellar Aged was okay for me this year. I wasn't maybe as critical as some other folks have been, and that could change. But I think it is a good comparison based on proof and based on age. So, Maker's Cellar, 119.3. So, actually a slight proof advantage, but being a wheater, we can maybe expect just a bit more of a relaxed sensation on the palate. So, let's go to the Makers now. Wow. All right. So I do like the Maker's Nose, and I think I talked about that when I tasted this on a live stream. It is definitely a little bit of a brighter fruit sensation, more strawberry candies, still kind of a raspberry cherry note, but they're a little more tart and a little on the more, you know, the brighter side of things. And actually maybe a little bit of a red apple sensation in the Makers too, which is not far off from what I would say about typical Makers products at at half the age or so. There is kind of a funk in the Makers, like an aged component, but it comes off very differently than the Discovery 12. Discovery 12, frankly, on the nose blows us out of the water, which is a good sign, and I'm glad that's the case. The Makers aged note is a little bit of a brighter funk, I would say, whatever that means. More of like a cheesecake funk. Whereas the Discovery is just dark and rich. So, palate now on the Makers. Ooh, very tart, front of the palate. Wow, very tart. In the finish, pretty non-existent on the Makers, even at 119. So, yeah, Discovery 12, I would say, is an easy win over the Maker's Cellar Aged, and I think that's probably reassuring for a lot of us, especially hearing some of the negative reviews about the Cellar Aged that I don't totally disagree with. I think I'm going to dive back into this bottle. I haven't posted an official review yet, but it is, I think it leaves a lot to be desired, and I do not think the Maker's Cellar Aged 2024 is a top 10 kind of whiskey of the year. All right, so resetting my palate with that Discovery 12. Oh, man. It gets more chocolatey and more dark fruit every sip. So, some of the critiques I had earlier, it feels like those appear for me earlier on as I sit with the whiskey. But the more I spend time with it, the more I really enjoy it. And I do think, like I said earlier on in this video, I do think it's changed quite a bit with some air in the bottle. So let's move on now. Let's do a little bit of a tougher comparison. Let's go to Jack Daniel's 12-year 2024, which is going to be batch 2, I believe. And proof on these are 107. So let's get into this Jack comparison. I'm going to reorder some of these glasses that I've got on the table, just so I can keep track of things. Okay. So on your right, Discovery, of course, and on your left is now the Jack 12 Batch 2. Yeah, it's interesting. Nicholas says, I agree with you. Disco 12 gets better as it sits in the glass and you've had several sips. There are, every whiskey is its own kind of journey. And like, as I'm saying these things to you guys right now in this video, I'm like, am I crazy? Am I crazy that I feel like this is evolving so much just in this one sitting? Is it all my palate? Is it because the whiskey does have a few rough edges, and so as you sip it more, you forget about them. Your palate kind of forgets about them and just focuses on the big obvious things, which is just how deep and dark and rich it is, and aged it feels on the palate. I don't know what combination of things are at play here, but I sometimes, like, even as I'm saying things in review videos or on streams like this, I question myself. And so it's good to hear someone else kind of agreeing with that. Okay. On to the Jack 12 now, which, full disclosure on this Jack 12, I did not like this batch 2 as much as batch 1. Just kind of across the board, I would say. Yeah, so Jack 12 batch 2, this is very much more on the bright side of things. Like, banana notes in here. They're not candied banana, so it's not as bright as you could possibly go on that note, like an Old Forester type product, but still banana notes. Kind of like, yeah, banana pudding a little bit. But underneath that, I do get a bit of smokiness, some charcoal notes, barrel char, all those things that are probably coming from that Lincoln County process. You know, signatures of the Jack Daniels. All right. I think I like the palate more than the nose on the Jack 12 batch 2. And even at 107 proof, which is a little bit lower than the 115 of Disco 12, there's a nice richness to the palate. It spreads out. It's very broad across the tongue. And as it gets into the finish, it's a flavorful finish. It's a long, flavorful finish for 107 proof. It's not just spice where the floor drops out, which is the complaint that I've had so far this year about Four Roses 2024 LE. Amazing whiskey, but the floor drops out and the spice hangs around and the flavor does not in the finish. This Jack 12, even if the nose is a little bit brighter, a little bit more youthy, and, you know, not as much of what I would like, I think the palate outdoes the nose, and the finish as well, you know, stands above the nose. Let's go back to Disco 12. Do a quick side-by-side on the nose here. It's funny, you know, the Jack, with all of its kind of chocolatey, charcoal, dark notes that are less fruit-driven and a little bit more just, you know, I don't know what you would call it. I guess just chocolate, you know, dark bittersweet driven, let's say. With all of those notes, in a side-by-side comparison with Discovery 12, the Discovery now really has a bright tart fruit note, like the kind of watermelon vibe that I was talking about in the beginning of this video. So it's funny how when you put things side-by-side like this, you can tease out notes from these whiskeys that you might otherwise, you know, you might lose those notes as you sit with the whiskey over time. And I think I did lose that note with the Discovery 12 after a few sips. All right, back to the palate, Disco 12. This is a good point in the chat. Parker brings it up. Jack Daniel's 12 SRP is lower than most of these, and that's a good point. I think, for me, I always have secondary value in my mind only because I never see these things at SRP, being in Ohio. But I think we do need to keep that in mind probably. What is it, about $100 for the Jack 12, or is it $80? You know, I think there's a case to be made for some folks, depending on the profile that you like, that you might have the Jack 12 tied or a little bit above the Discovery 12. I think there is a case to be made. For me personally, I prefer the profile of the Discovery 12 more, because that banana note can overpower and outshine things very quickly on Jack products. I'm also not the biggest fan of Jack Daniels. It takes a specific product or a specific single barrel pick for me to go crazy over this stuff. So I've been critical of this batch 2 in the past. I'm going to be critical of it again today. I'm going to say that Discovery 12 does get the win on that particular bottle there. Yeah, so about $90 it seems like from the chat for Jack 12. I think I saw Matt Porter in here a second ago, guys. There we go. ADHD Whiskey. For those of you watching this live or within the same week that I put this video out, I will be live with Matt Porter, I believe, on Friday. I just sent him a bunch of blind samples today. I think I sent like Yeah, 12 blind samples. He probably won't get through all of those on Friday night stream, but we'll see how many he can go through. There's a couple different things, a side-by-side, 6 pours here and 6 pours there. All right, let's keep moving. Mike says, cheapest I found it is $225. Yeah, pretty much the same for me, secondary. Let's keep moving now. I'm going to put this next to Russell's Reserve 13. Even though this is not a 2024 product, I think it is a little bit of a benchmark profile to compare this to, especially if the rumors are true and that 48% of the blend is in fact turkey, then this would be absolutely a good comparison to do. Let me get a little more in the glass. Okay. Sam asks, Cam, are you generally a fan of Jack? Yeah, like kind of what I said a second ago is, you know, largely no, until it gets to a certain age and or a certain proof, and even then it's not a guarantee. So I think it's always a try before you buy for me on single barrel products from them. And then all of these age stated releases that they've been doing, especially with the 14-year coming up, sounds like maybe first quarter of 2025 that might drop. Especially with all of those, I'm pretty much going to buy those outright because I'm curious about them. And in the case of like Jack 12 Batch 1, that was a good gamble, you know, or for me to pick up, I guess, because that was a really good one. Batch 2, a little less for me, and so that's why this sample was very important. So thanks to Tim B for sending that sample. And then also, forgot to mention this at the beginning of the stream, TimTamSlam, another Tim, up in Michigan, sent me this bottle of Discovery 12, snagged it at SRP, so thank you. All right, so I believe this is batch 4 of Russell's 13, LL/LC. Let me know if I'm correct on that, guys, if you know in the chat. Wow, all right. So the nose of the Russell's 13, actually a little bit brighter overall, except for one note, which is a grape note. A lot of older turkey products, the 12101, the Asian market export, and some of these Russell's 13s, they can have a really distinct grape note to them, and I love that note. This Russell's 13 does have that. But then everything else in the profile actually feels a little bit brighter. Brighter caramels, brighter vanillas and that kind of thing. All right. Still a good leather note in that. Now on to the Discovery 12. Yeah, it's more filled out. It's a little bit more richer. I feel like the Russell's 13 is trying to go from, let's say this point of being bright toned and this point of being dark. Whereas I feel like the Discovery 12 is a little bit more focused. It's a little more of a narrow band overall of flavors. Even though it has a few brights and a few extra darks, I'd say generally speaking, it's a more narrow band of flavor. And I prefer that in this case on the nose because I love the focus on those dark red fruit notes in the Discovery 12. This is the Russell's 13. Very solid. Very grapey. Purple, black fruit notes on this. A great leather, great aged oak. A light vanilla note sitting on the top. Good spice. Finish, not crazy long on this Russell's 13. All right, now on to Discovery 12 again. Slower development on the Russell's 12 in this comparison. A little flash of nuttiness on the mid palate of the of the Discovery 12, which I hadn't picked up yet today. I've picked it up on this bottle before, but I think the comparison up against this Russell's 13, for whatever reason, brought out a little bit of nuttiness on the mid palate of the Discovery 12. But a slower moving development, which contributes then to a longer finish on the Discovery 12. So I think actually this is a pretty easy defeat. Discovery 12 over Russell's 13, which I believe is batch number 4. That's a surprisingly easy victory for me. I thought that would give it a little more trouble in this comparison. So, very cool. Rook Anderson, thank you for the super chat. $20. Says was going to give $12 for Disco 12, but since it wasn't an option, rounded up. Love your work. Thoughtful reviews. Thank you. Thanks for being here. This is a little bit of a different thing. It's kind of rapid fire comparisons and stuff, but I'll be interested to hear what everybody thinks live and the folks that watch the replay. Just another quick reminder, I won't beat this like a dead horse, but please hit that like button and hit that subscribe button as well. Especially if you're new here, we're almost at 10,000 subscribers, which is a pretty cool milestone. It's not a lot, but for this channel, it is pretty cool. Let's keep it moving. I think it's time to do something crazy. I think it's time to bust this out. And this is before I've had one sip of this off camera. This just arrived an hour ago. This is the Old Grandad 16 year. It's only 100 proof. So as far as proof goes in this comparison, it's probably the most disparate, the most disparate proof of the bunch that we've had so far. So I'm not going to necessarily hold it against this OGD if the proof is just not, not at the same level of the Discovery 12. But I think nonetheless, it will be kind of a cool comparison. And this review, for the OGD 16 should drop this week in a video series on the channel called Performance. So I'm going to play a drum cover for you guys at the end of the video, so I get to showcase a little bit of what I do day to day in my musical life, because I am a professional percussionist and drummer, and showcase that at the end of the video. But we're going to start off with the review of this. So that should drop. I'm shooting for Thursday this week. We'll see how that goes. Wow. What a freaking nose on the OGD. At 100 proof, lighter, more delicate. Big candied orange notes, chocolate candied orange, like those orange-infused chocolate bars that you can get. That's kind of what this smells like. And then just the most beautiful, rich caramel note. I know that sounds cliche. And the Jim Beam nuttiness is not really there for me. You could convince me there's a hint of it in the background, but I think the rye spice takes over here. It's a higher rye mash, in the 30% range, 33 or 37, one of those two, I believe, for the rye percentage in this OGD. The nose is just gorgeous on this. So this is not an OGD review. Oh my God. Kind of an OGD review now. That's a first impression for you. Wow. Okay. And actually, interestingly, on the palate, kind of a similarity to the Discovery 12, I feel like, in a particular way. Let's see. So this is still darker, the Discovery 12, and I think that's where this is going to shine in all these comparisons. It's always going to be the darker profile when you go side by side, unless you're putting it next to like a Russell's 15, in which case it will probably get blown out of the water on the dark scale. I don't know, man. I mean, this is really close. And I think that's a testament to this OGD 16 probably being only 100 proof. The fact that it's hitting, it's a good comparison to this Discovery 12. At that point, it's more like, what do you value in whiskey? But the proof of the Discovery 12, it's hard to argue with it, because it adds such complexity and richness just by nature of hitting the palate harder. So, Sam, this is a good point. Yeah. So the OGD, it's kind of unconfirmed on price right now for the Grandad 16. I've seen more than one person say that this is 150 SRP, and I've seen a lot of people say it's 200 SRP. So at the time of this video, we don't know. We can't find a press release on this, and the distillery is more expensive, but that's because they're buying it at the distillery, right? But when you go price on these, if you go pure SRP, even at 150 or 200, the Discovery 12 is probably going to win out. This OGD 16, though, for me, selfishly, I love this profile. So this will most likely be a top 10 whiskey of the year for me, I would say. Whereas a lot of the ones I've tasted so far, like the Makers is not going to be there. That Russell's 13, even though it was last year, if it were this year, it would not make my cut. The JD 12 could be a top 10er. This is probably definitively going to be a top 10er. And this is actually showing really well tonight. So I said 10 to 8, 10 to 7. This could be more of like a 5, 6, or 7 of the year, I think, Discovery 12. It's growing on me the more we sit with it. So let's do one final comparison now. I'm deciding between the Old Forester Birthday Bourbon and the River Roots 18. What do you guys think in the chat? Throw an answer in the chat in the next 15 seconds. Let me know, is the Old Forester Birthday Bourbon a better comparison because more of them are produced, or do you want to find out next to the River Roots 18, which is 117.9 proof? I think, but listen, again, first impression as this OGD 16 is very, very good stuff. Big fan. All right, so we got a lot of a split chat. A few more answers in there, please, if you guys don't mind. River Roots 18 or Birthday Bourbon? What do you think? And I do, you know what? I should do it next to this Boulder. But while we wait for the chat to decide for us, let's do this Boulder comparison. So Boulder is only an $85 bottle. I know 85 is a lot for some folks, but in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to these limited releases, it could be a lot more. So we're gonna do this Boulder, and it has a proof advantage distinctly at 128.4. So let's see if even with the proof advantage, if the Disco 12 can come out on top of this Boulder Spirits. So let's see. Boulder Spirits is about 7-ish years old in the blend. Mark, is Boulder a top 10? I don't think necessarily, but I think it's an interesting kind of sleeper bourbon of the year, and it was suggested to throw it in here and just see how it does. It's unfair in the fact that it has a proof advantage, but it's also on the other side of things maybe not a top 10er for me. So let's just see what that mixture produces in this comparison. Interestingly, if you put the Boulder up against the Jack 12, I think some people might take this Boulder over the Jack 12 Batch 2, actually. The Jack is older on the nose, like you feel that age statement. Little almond note coming out of the Jack 12. I love that finish. I love the age in the finish. It's just that banana note that turned me off a little bit. A substantial finish. Getting into like a black cherry note, actually. Now, with that out of the way, the Boulder is a little bit brighter, but it's more chocolatey, and I don't know, man. This is good stuff. Wow. It's a great palate. It's a great palate. All right, let's see how this does compared to the Discovery 12. It is brighter. It is more chocolate focused. There's a dark honey note to this. You do feel a little bit of a what appears to be like a Lincoln County process charcoal note, even though this did not go through the Lincoln County process. Those are some of the attributes of this Boulder, which I've, again, already reviewed on the channel. Back to Disco 12. And just like the Jack Daniel's 12 did in a side-by-side, the Boulder is doing the same thing in the side-by-side with the Discovery, which is that it's teasing out, I keep using that word, I don't know why I keep saying teasing, it's drawing out the brighter notes of the Discovery because the Boulder is so dark and the Jack was so dark as well. So it's bringing to life more of those tart notes, those tart watermelons, and a little bit of that tart cherry note that sits on the top. And this also goes to show me, and would be interested, to have your input on this too, that when you have two things side by side where the proofs are so different, in this case 13 proof points, it's a huge factor in tasting whiskey side by side. It's hard to do 130 versus 115. It's really hard to do that comparison because the 130 is always going to have an advantage in some way, whether it's development on the palate, just intensity, whatever. Oh, but you can't, listen. You cannot argue with the notes on the Discovery 12. The Boulder's good. The Boulder, in this tasting that I'm doing right now, This Boulder is a super sleeper bourbon of 2024, in my opinion. Humongous sleeper. Some people are going to prefer it over the Jack 12. Some people are probably going to prefer it even over, I mean, Maker's Cellar, I would think. I would think Boulder's going to beat Maker's Cellar. You know? Wow. But this is all just proving that Discovery 12 is a substantial product. All right? So let's wrap up. Let's do a birthday bourbon. Instead of the River Roots, got to get one fresh glass. Yeah, I think I saw a comment in the chat that said something about, the River Roots is pretty much unobtainable, and that's true. 170 bottles. There's no sense. As we're this deep into the video, let's do something that folks are going to have a chance at, which will be this birthday bourbon. 107 proof, 12-year age statement. Essentially an Old Forester version of Jack 12. Although on the nose, I have to give the nod on the nose, probably to the birthday bourbon. The birthday bourbon with that blueberry note just jumping out of the glass. And again, I called this out on the review of the birthday bourbon, that kind of yeast note. It's the one turnoff to me, similar to the banana note in the Jack Daniels, that can be a turnoff. Although on batch 1 12-year for Jack, I didn't find that much banana. I thought it was well balanced. Batch 2, more banana. This birthday bourbon, everything about it I'm a gigantic fan of, except for that yeast note on the top. Some folks might call that a little bit of like a yogurt note. To me, it feels almost like a blueberry yogurt, because of the strong blueberry note. The nose on this Old Forester, though, even with that one complaint I have, it's going to be very hard to beat. I think this is a top 10 whiskey of the year for me. Pretty relaxed on the palate, even at 107. It feels soft. It feels luxurious and elegant. A little bit short on the finish, actually. Maybe that's just compared to the other things I've been tasting, and maybe that is true, and I didn't call that out in my initial review. Back to Discovery 12. This is a very, very tight comparison on the nose, I would say. And this is going to be the last comparison that we do before we wrap this up, guys. So we're about at the 43-ish minute mark. This is maybe the closest comparison on the nose, because the Discovery 12 is so fruit forward with those dark red fruits, and the birthday bourbon is extremely fruit forward, but with blueberry and with like blackberry and grape notes, so a little bit more of a blue, purple, black fruit type sensation. I think they're equal in their concentration on those notes, even though the proof advantage goes to the Discovery 12. I think the birthday bourbon is very concentrated and packed in. So I would call this a tie, and maybe even advantage to the birthday bourbon on the nose, which would be probably the first time any of these have so distinctively won on the nose against the Discovery 12 tonight. Yeah, I just think that nose on the birthday bourbon is phenomenal. So let's go to the palate one more time on that. Wow. If that birthday bourbon was 115 to 120 proof, that would probably be whiskey of the year. I mean, to me, it's that impressive. It's only the proof that holds it back a little bit. But the nose is outstanding. I love that profile. All right, back to Discovery 12 now. Discovery 12 is rougher around the edges on the palate. And I think that's what the birthday bourbon exposes about it. Being so soft, silky, elegant. Silky smooth on the palate is the best way to talk about the Old Forester. Being that way then exacerbates the difference in the Discovery 12, which is a little bit more angular. It is rich. It is a big whiskey, but it's more angular on the palate. This is a toss-up. I don't know about this. So I'm not going to call Discovery 12 a winner over the Birthday Bourbon just yet. I think for a lot of folks, it would be an easy win on the palate, but I factor the nose a lot into this. And I factor the elegance of the Birthday Bourbon into this too. So I would have to revisit this. I'm not going to call a winner in this video, but if you guys have had the chance in the live chat or in the comment section of the replay later, let me know if you've tried both of these and which one you would prefer. But I do think this Birthday Bourbon to me this year, which is not a whiskey I get to taste every year, is a standout product. That's a top 10. The Discovery 12 is a top 10. And that old Grandad 16 is going to be interesting to see how it develops. So, with that said, we're going to wrap this up. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, check out the Patreon for exclusive content and barrel picks, excuse me. And I also, today, was able to procure an Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch C924. So that review is going to be coming ASAP on the channel. I've already compared it to B524 just before this stream, and it's an interesting comparison. So I think you'll be excited to find out about that one, because I'm excited to go back and retaste those two. So that's going to do it, guys. Moral of the story today, Discovery 12 is a banger of a whiskey. It is a top 10 whiskey. It stands up very well against all of these. Mops the floor with the majority of the whiskeys that we've tasted tonight. Competitive with a few others. And the Birthday Bourbon is the one that is hanging there, if not just slightly above it. So thank you, cheers, and I'll see you guys soon here on Drums and Drams.